Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Network Compromise for the Technically Challenged. My name is Carol, author of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Doc Blackburn, Certified SANS Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Doc. And Doc, your video looks great.
Well, I thank you. That's quite a compliment, best compliment I've had today. That officially you're only the second person I've talked to today. The other was my daughter, and so there's that. So good morning, everybody. And oh shoot, no, it's afternoon. Good COVID day, everybody. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is. But my calendar told me that I needed to get up and give this presentation because somewhere along the line I promised to. And so what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about how adversaries compromise networks. But what I am not going to do is I am not going to get into the heavy details as to what commands attackers type and things like that. No, I'm going to just talk about the tools, what their goals are, and just give you a taste of what an adversary does in order to compromise your network and your environment. So as Carol had mentioned, I am Doc Blackburn, and I've got some certifications. I lost track. I couldn't count them right now, and I know that I'm working on 2 more at this moment, but that's not there to brag or anything. Basically what I want to tell you is if you look at those certifications, they're all over the place, and I come from decades of IT experience, and just in the last 10 years found security as my real calling. And the reason that I think that happened for me was that through my IT experience, and spending 10 years as an independent contractor doing IT-like things for businesses, I liked to feed my family. And so when somebody is in your office, therefore a website, let's say I'm doing website design for this person, they're sitting in my office and they say, hey, Doc, can you administrate our small network too? You're a computer guy, you could do that, right? And when you're trying to feed your family, when a client asks you if you can do something, the correct answer is always yes, I can do that for you. And so I got this broad knowledge just by a trial by fire in doing those types of things. And when I found security, I realized something about security. Security was all about knowing all of the different ways that an attacker could successfully compromise you, and then fix all the ways that they could do it, right? We've probably, for those that are on the call that have been around cybersecurity for a while, you know the adage of there's the attacker can find just one of a myriad different sort of ways to get into your network, and so what must you fix? All of them, because all they need is one of those things to successfully compromise you. And so I approached this talk with that thought in mind, that sort of background of what it is that we're trying to solve here. So the reason that I have put together this talk, the audience that I'm looking to reach here, are those who maybe you're new into cybersecurity, maybe you've been in cybersecurity for a while, but just a certain area, and you're interested in knowing, what's the full scope of when an attacker, from the moment that they wake up in the morning and decide that they're evil, and then attack you, and all of those steps, what do they do? And so it's intended for that audience, but it's also intended for all of you noobs out there, right? All these new people. You do not have to come into this talk with any sort of technical knowledge. It helps, but I'm going to explain most of these terms as they are. And so the talk has been designed for the defenders that are out there, and those that are just curious as to how it's done. Now, with this, the 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 way that attackers successfully compromise a network isn't that they had some sort of a voodoo doll or some crazy magic wand or something like that. Find some fancy new attack that when the sun is at in the sky at 96 degrees or what, I don't know, I'm making stuff up right now. I probably should stop that. I'm going off the rails here, but when the planets align just perfectly, I can compromise your network, but only if the moon is blue and only if there's a wolf howling outside. Oh, and I must be standing on one hand while my tinfoil hat is still on my head while I'm upside down. That's not how attackers get into your network. It's not some fancy sort of ninja tricks that they do. In fact, attackers are lazy, which is to our advantage, right? An attacker will find the easiest way to get into your network and use that. And so what a lot of people don't understand in coming into cybersecurity is the fact that an attacker is going to find the easy way to get in. So what must you do? Nobody here has unlimited time and resources, right, to fix everything, and that's just a sad reality that we're in. But the good news is you don't have to be the most locked down per se necessarily. What you need to do is you need to be doing things better than everybody else. Is that fair? Which means running faster than everybody else away from that bear. You know the adage, two guys are walking through the forest and they come upon this this hungry, mean bear and starts posturing on them. And one of the guys, he gets down on one knee, takes off his hiking boots and puts on his running shoes. And the other guy says, "What are you doing, man? You aren't going to outrun that bear." And he says, "I don't intend to outrun the bear. I plan to outrun you." And so that's really what we're talking about here, is being a better runner. So I'm going to show you the steps that the attacker takes. And the purpose of showing you the steps is so you understand what step the attacker is in when you see evidence of their wrongdoing. I'm going to talk through their steps of compromise. So when you discover them, you know where they're at with things. And then this is meant to be a conversation starter where you start thinking about what an attack on your network would look like. What are those indicators of compromise or potential compromise, so that you can start looking at that, knowing where the attacker is in their steps, what their motives are, so that you can better defend. All right. So we're going to talk about these steps, but I have to put the disclaimer up there. Use these things only with permission. If you are on your internal home network, great, you own that network, you can do those sorts of things. If you're on your work network, it better be part of your job description in writing, right? Or you need to have some sort of authorization to do so, either through policy or at very least you have written authorization from your boss or your boss's boss or whoever high up enough in the company, that your organization, that you can get their permission in writing to do so, because you can break things using these techniques. So we have to be careful with them. All right. And also keep in mind the legal ramifications of doing things on a network that network was not intended for. And so that's the other piece of an attacker, is the attacker is going to use the resources that you have on your network against you. And so these things that exist for some legitimate reason are now going to be abused for an illegitimate reason. All right, so there's nothing fancy to it. And in fact, without any further ado, let's just get to it. And I'm going to ask myself, I woke up this morning, apparently this afternoon. I woke up this afternoon and I awoke evil. I am now evil Doc. Dun, 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 dun. And so evil Doc starts thinking, well, all of this stuff I know about my network, all of the stuff I know about compromise, what if I actually put that to use? What if I actually did that? what would that look like? And notice this is Evil Doc, who is a fictional character because there is law enforcement in the room, and Good Doc is a white hat, right? A white hat, it means a security professional who does things with authorization to see if those things can be done so that he can successfully defend his network, all right? And so these are the 7 steps that Evil Doc, the fictional character, would do. And I'm going to go through each one of these: of reconnaissance, scanning, initial point of compromise, lateral movement, data exploitation. That notice data exploitation is what the attacker came in for. And notice that's all the way back on step 5 of these 7 steps. And then creating backdoors and covering up my tracks. All right. So let's get to it. Step 1 is all about recon, and I like to spend, the more time I spend in step number 1, the more successful and the easier all of the other steps are. So I am going to spend the most time in step number 1. There's also another reason. In step 1, in doing recon, if I do step 1 correctly, I can be in this step, and my target, whoever it is that I'm trying to compromise, doesn't know it. I can be in step number 1 forever, learning information about them without them even knowing that this is happening. All right. So first, I have listed, I'm going to go through each of these. My goal is to better understand my target, the victim organization that I'm going after. And so let's say all I have is a domain name for them. They want to find out more information. All I know is that when I go to their website, I type in www.sans.org. Who is that? Who am I attacking? And so step number 1 is I am going to, let me go ahead and pull open, I have internic.net here. With internic.net, basically what you do is you go to their Who Is page, and I'm going to back up a little bit here. And so I'm at their Who Is page. If I back up one step further, you're going to see this at this page at internic.net. You click Who Is, and then I am going to put in my target domain, that domain name that I type in a web browser, and start there. Now, this is in no way an endorsement to attack sans.org, all right? Sans is happy to show you how this is done, but they frown upon people using them as a test bed for your nefarious activities, all right? So just to be clear here. So I can see that there is, because with these domain names, let me back up for a second. Did you know that a company doesn't own their own domain name? There's no such thing as owning your domain name. You are leasing it for a set period in time. Yeah. And so SANS had decided, well, we want sans.org as our domain name. They see that nobody has registered it at the time that they wanted to register it, so they go to a domain registrar. Theirs was domainpeople.com. You can see they went to domainpeople.com and said, we want sans.org. Domainpeople.com looks at the list and says, okay, nobody has that domain name yet, so you can rent it for a lease period of 1 year at a time. So you lease at year increments, basically. And then so as long as you're paying your annual fees to lease that domain name, you get to keep sans.org or whatever .com your organization has. They've leased it from what we call domain registrar, all right? And so I see that the registrar is domain people. That's interesting. Now I also notice creation date. This means the date and time when sans.org was initially registered. And that date says 1995. As far as internet terms goes, is this an old company or a new company? In the 90s, as my kids call it, the 1900s. Dad, you were born in the 1900s. And I said, that's not nice. That may be true, but now you hurt my feelings. So back in the 1900s, SANS registered their domain name. So this is pre-Jurassic as far as internet companies go. And then I can see that the record was last updated in June 13, which happens in a few days of 2019. Now, the other piece of information that I'm really interested in here is, say, in 2022, August 3rd, that is the last date that SANS has SANS.org. Now, can SANS renew? Of course they can. But maybe Evil Doc, what he's going to do is put this, make a calendar appointment for this date. Evil Doc is going to check to see if SANS.org is still registered. And some people are like, well, they're not going to be that dumb. They won't forget. Tell that to the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys lost their domain name, dallascowboys.com, because there was a billing contact that they had listed in their registration. That billing contact address went to a single individual who had left the Dallas Cowboys organization, and nobody noticed that she was still the person that was the contact. She didn't check that email account anymore, that the email went nowhere, and the Dallas Cowboys domain went down. Their website went down because they no longer had their domain name. And some of you may say, yeah, well, that's Dallas. That sounds typical. Well, how about Hotmail? Hotmail.com went down as well. Before Microsoft owned Hotmail, they forgot to re-register their domain name. One of the Hotmail users had noticed the website is down. He can't get his email. And then he notices why. It's like, oh, well, the domain name isn't registered. So what'd he do? Yep, you know it. He registered the domain name. And then people are like, yeah, and then he sold it back to them, right? And it's like, no, actually, he did something different at first. What he did was he pointed the DNS servers, the domain name service servers, back to the IP addresses for Hotmail so that he could get his email, right? Because that's all he wanted to do. And from my understanding, he gave the domain name back. They probably paid him for his trouble, but he wasn't registering it with intent to sell. He just wanted to get his email. But meanwhile, Evil Doc is thinking, hey, if I could take over their domain, that would be a lot of different attacks that I could use against them, right? And so there used to be, inside of these listings, there was an administrative, technical, and billing contact. There are 3 different contacts in here. That is no longer listed. Thank you, GDPR. There's a regulation in EU that says that personal information can't just be left hanging out there for the public to see. Everybody argued, yeah, but this is valuable information. We need this, but thanks GDPR, that information isn't there anymore. Now, I can also see their DNS servers. I had mentioned these domain name service servers. The DNS server is going to give the somebody going to SANS.org, those DNS servers are going to give in SANS.org what is the IP address of this website. The IP address is necessary because we need to know where network traffic goes, and we'll call those packets. When I'm talking about packets, I'm talking about network traffic. Imagine like letters in the US Postal Service. A packet is a letter that's on the network of networks on the internet, and this packet needs to know where it's going. Just like a letter in the US Postal Service, you are going to have a to address and a from address, and so will a packet as well. All right, and so where do we send packets to SANS.org? I can simply do and you're going to see on the slides, our next step is to do an NS lookup. So I am simply going to pull up, I'm in Windows here, I'm going to pull up a command line window and just simply type in NS lookup space SANS.org. And when I hit enter, it's going to give me an IP address. Ooh, or with SANS, it gave me 2 IP addresses. These are the destinations for packets that I send to SANS.org. So good people, nice people, when they visit the website, they go to sans.org. These are the IP addresses they go to. And so what is evil attacker going to do? Oh, well, that's where I hurt your organization, is at those addresses, all right? So that's something that I needed to know as an attacker. But is it likely, with sans.org being a company from the 1900s, is it likely that they only own these 2 IP addresses, or might they have whole ranges of IP addresses? It's likely they've got ranges of IP addresses. And what I'm going to do now, and so I'm not tempting the fates of any sort of power that's out there beyond my control, I'm going to stop tracking on sans.org and let's go after somebody else for equal opportunity, right? Let's attack lots of people. And so for those IP address ranges, I am going to ask Aaron. Aaron stands for the American Registry for Internet Numbers. And what they do is they keep track of all of those IP addresses and who owns them. All right. So I just pulled up for Google here. I asked Google, I said, hey, tell me what are the IP addresses that Google LLC owns. And so I can see in this listing that Google has ranges and ranges of IP addresses. We can see a whole bunch of them here. For those that are familiar, these we've got a bunch of IP version 6 addresses here. You can see down below there's a bunch of IPv4 address ranges. And these are very valuable to companies because these are endpoint addresses. Imagine them being like PO boxes. These are endpoint addresses so that they can have servers and other services sitting there. And so it's very valuable to them. In fact, some of these IP address ranges, Google got a hold of them because they bought the company that had those IP address ranges registered with Aaron. So what they actually did was they acquired the company, not necessarily for what the company could do, but the resource that they had that Google wanted, those IP addresses, all right? So let's go ahead and file that away for the moment here and talk about a few other things. One of the things that as I am going through doing my recon is I want to see what other resources does your organization have that maybe you don't want me to know about, Evil Doc to know about. One of the things I can do is I can go to, I'm just going to choose a winner here or a loser, depending on how you look at it. I'm going to choose Target. I'm going to go to www.target.com/robots.txt. The robots.txt file is a page that if you put a plain text file on your website, in the root of your website, called robots.txt, search engines are going to find this robots.txt file. And this is a list of, please do not index in your search results these areas of my website. And I don't know about you guys, but personally, when I look at robots.txt for Target, it just popped right out at me here. I really like this one right here. /admin. Should there even be a target.com/admin here on their public facing site? I don't think so. That doesn't sound like a good thing to have there. Now, some people are saying, go there, go there, go there. Now, seeing this robots.txt list is one thing. This is publicly accessible information. Target intended for this information to be accessed. What they have told the search engines is don't go there. So as a normal, good, happy user, should I be going there to /admin? It could be argued that I'm stepping over the line at that point. So I'm not going to step over that line, but I just want to show you guys that if robots.txt tells the search engines where the search engine shouldn't be indexing, as Evil Doc, I'm thinking these are the places I want to check out first, because it's kind of like a treasure map. Target is saying, hey, nobody should go to these places. So Evil Doc starts thinking, tenting his fingers and, yes, I like that. So that's the robots.txt file. Another useful piece of information to start, notice I know their IP addresses now, but now I'm starting to get a picture of the company itself. With robots.txt, I got some information there. Monster.com or any sort of job recruiting website like Dice or any of those can be very interesting repositories of information. And in fact, last night, I went to monster.com. I typed in systems administrator and searched for a sysadmin job openings, and I didn't put the employers here, but you can do the same thing. And this is just lines from multiple employers saying, first one here is experience in middleware application stacks, and start naming those middleware stacks, and then planning, implementing, and management of Windows Server 2008 and 2012. And so next line, experience in Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 7, knowledge of GitLab, experience with Amazon Web Services. Boy, as I'm reading these things, aren't you starting to get a feel of what this company's technologies are that they use before we've even sent a single packet to them? Aren't you starting to get a real picture as to where they're at? So that's very interesting. Before I go into my next phase, my phase 2 is scanning them, which means sending packets at their environment. And so when I come out of step 1, going into step 2, I am now going to change my tactics as the attacker. I'm going to start communicating with them. It's their first sign that something evil may be happening, right? And so before I go from phase 1 to phase 2, let me do one other thing. In case somebody has already done this work for me, sending packets at them and retrieving the results, Shodan does that for you. I pulled up one particular example for Shodan here for you. And with this particular example, you have to actually have a Shodan account, and so that you can pull these images. But I just told Shodan, hey, just show me the images that you've been gathering on the web. Most of them end up being desktops for mainly Windows machines. And so I clicked on images, I got to page 2, and as the attacker, all of a sudden I just started drooling. I was like, oh, this is perfect. Because we've got, I know it's kind of hard to see, but you can see this window. You probably can't see the text in there. That text says Windows Server 2003. And over here in this corner, I have one that is obviously a login window for Windows XP, right? I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. And so I can see the results. Why am I so interested in Windows Server 2003 and Windows XP? Those are what we refer to as deprecated operating systems. It means that this operating system is no longer receiving security patches. And there have been more than a dozen different vulnerabilities that an attacker can use to get into a Windows XP machine if only TCP port 3389 is open, and of course it is here because we can see the desktop. And so, and actually I saw TCP port 80 was open as well. I know I'm bringing in new terms I haven't used yet, and I said this is for non-technical people. Think of these ports, port 80 and 3389, as this is where a certain service lives. And so if Evil Doc wants to attack this service, I know what service is running there now. We'll get into that in a slide in a moment here. But it just kind of starts giving Evil Doc an idea of, oh, and I can see this information up here. And some people are like, Doc, is this okay that you're even showing this? Isn't this sensitive information about this company? Yes, but this is already publicly available information. If I scanned this network, I would have seen the same thing. And so Shodan is providing a useful service, but they're not necessarily, there's been no successful challenge that says that Shodan is breaking the law by providing this information. All right. So we are about a halfway point in this hour-long talk, and I'm still in step 1, right? Remember, I spend the most time in step 1 because it'll make all of the other steps go a lot faster and a lot easier. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to step 2. We are now scanning. There are 3 things that I am looking for as Evil Doc to find ways to get into your networks. I am looking for a visible IP address. So that's a destination that I can reach on your network. And I need an open port. Notice I saw open ports on that machine. I saw port 80 was open and 3389 was open. Port 80 is HTTP web page servers, right? And 3389 is the remote desktop protocol for the Windows operating system. So now I know they've got some open ports, and then I can see if they have vulnerable services at those ports. Now, I could ping somebody's website. Ping is okay as far as seeing if a web page is there, if there's a web server there or something like that. But your firewall may be shunning me, might stop me from pinging you. So I am going to use other tools like hping and Scapy in order to find visible IP addresses where I'm going to scan through your firewall. So check out those tools, and I have links to the tools in the notes for those who want the, and there's other resources available. There's a whole operating system called, well, and I just lost it for a second there. The operating system, I wanted to call it Backtrack, so that's the old one. Kali. Kali Linux is an operating system that has these tools built in for free. And you can use these tools to try to try to trick a firewall into believing that these are already existing valid connections, like setting the TCP ACK flag, acknowledging this connection already exists, even though there's not a valid connection there. So I get through your firewall, all right? So ping is okay, but scanning through your firewall, that's the bomb. That's what I want to do. So I use those tools to do that. But then, so I find these visible IP addresses. I need an open port. Nmap gives me the ability, this is another tool in Kali, gives the ability to find those ports. And you can see on the top right here, I can see I scanned a Windows machine and found certain ports are open. You can see the IP address listed there. And then Nmap will also, if I ask it to, it'll connect to those open ports and pull down some information about what service is listening on those ports. And so I can see that there is at port 21, there's an FTP server running here, file transfer protocol. Interesting. There might be something useful there. TCP port 80 means HTTP. There's a Microsoft web server there. Awesome. And so let's say I see Microsoft IIS HTTPD 10.0. And so what I do, I open up Google and I type in Microsoft IIS HTTP D 10.0 vulnerabilities and see to tell Google, do your thing, show me what the vulnerabilities are for that service and that version number of the service. Now I could manually do that for all of those ports, or I could use what we call a vulnerability scanner. Like Nessus or OpenVAS does that. OpenVAS is the free open source version of Nessus. And so I use a tool like that to then, that tool does the same thing the Nmap did, but then take it one step further. They have a database of all of these known vulnerabilities for versions and patch levels. And so they look up in that database table, what are the vulnerabilities there for that particular service at that particular patch level. All right. So now, these are the 3 things they needed: a visible IP address, an open port, and a vulnerable service at that port. So it's very iterative what I'm doing here. It's very discrete in its process. And so now, step 3 is I find one of those I scan your network long enough, I'm going to find one, and then I compromise the machine at that point. How do I compromise the machine? There's tools out there to do that. One of them is called Metasploit. Metasploit is a tool that's also built into Kali, and Kali is a free download. How much would you pay for this OS? Don't ask. Don't answer now. There's so many different things that it does, and it's free to use, right? And notice all of these tools. Yeah, this tool can be used for evil. This is why I'm saying always get written permission to do so, right? And so Metasploit just simply, it's a command line tool, and that can put off a lot of Windows users that are used to clicking, but this is just basically what you do. Is it's a framework where I enter the IP address. We discovered that IP address by scanning the adversary, scanning the target, right? And then I enter the port number, which port I am going to connect to at that IP address. And then step 3, I choose the exploit from a list. It's a database list of all of these different exploits. Which one do I choose? I choose an exploit that's likely to work with whatever vulnerability I found at that service. All right, so whatever the vulnerability was in the service that I noticed is, oh, well, look, the vulnerability scanner says that it is vulnerable to SMB version 1, the vulnerabilities, and not to get into too much detail there, but that's just an unpatched version of a Windows service, all right? And so I choose my exploit based on that vulnerable service. I load a payload in. What's the payload? It is whatever I want to do that's evil on that machine, whether it is to run a program or to open up a reverse shell back to me so I can type commands into that machine, or whatever it is. That is my payload. And then I simply, after I load those 4 things, I type exploit, hit enter, and Metasploit does the rest of the work for me. Once that payload is executed, Metasploit allows me to do whatever I intended to do at that point. And that's really all the attacker does. It's that easy. Now, the attacker has a machine in your environment. Notice, did Evil Doc go after a specific machine in your environment? No, I didn't care. And this points out one of the biggest flaws we have in our cybersecurity thinking today. One of our biggest flaws is that you ever hear, you're working in an organization and you ever hear somebody say, yeah, that machine over there, we're not worried about that one. It doesn't have any sensitive information on it. Wrong, right? No, we care about all of the machines. Did the attacker care which one he got into? No, so we don't care either. We have to protect all of our machines, right? Whether they have sensitive information or not. Because what the attacker is going to do from there is use whatever compromised machine they created a foothold on. They are going to use that as what we call a pivot point. With this pivot point, this is now a machine that I, evil attacker, own at this point. And so I am going to use it to start at step 1 and 2 and do those all over again. I'm going to do internal recon and internal scanning on your network using your own machine against you, all right? So what that looks like is I am going to start looking for other resources that I couldn't see from the internet. I got inside of your network, I start poking around, I do more scanning, I say, wow, the view is much better from here, right? Because that firewall, that nasty firewall, is no longer in my way. And so I start looking around, I say, wow, there's a lot more here that I could use. Oh, and look, that machine is compromisable, that machine is compromisable. This one right here, I can see all of the users that logged into it and their password hashes. Oh, I like that. I'm going to download those and try to crack those passwords. I see your internal DNS server had more domain names in it than your external one. Great, that's good information. And so I basically hit the room when the big stone door opens and you go in the room with all of the gold and riches there. You look around and say, "Wow, this is awesome. I want to do all these things," right? And so what does that look like to the attacker? There's a tool called Armitage. Armitage installs on top of Metasploit. If Metasploit wasn't easy enough with typing in just those 5 items that you needed to compromise a machine, Armitage does it in a pretty graphical user interface for you. And so you can see, I just did a screen grab here. We've got a machine up top, this red machine with lightning bolts. And so that means that machine has been compromised by the adversary, and that the adversary can then see all of these other machines that they couldn't see before from the outside, and now they're on the inside. The evil attacker is going to pivot around and start going to compromise machines here, pillage for resources, and then continue that process until Evil Doc gets what he came here for. The data, whatever that thing was, we're now going to do data exploitation. I found your HR database or your sales database, whatever I was going after. And so I grabbed that data. Is it hard to get out of the environment? Most environments do great inbound firewall filtering, but very poor outbound. And so just using secure shell, SSH, or file transfer protocol, FTP, or just setting up a Trojan that just exfiltrates that data, easy. Now, if you're a little bit more locked down than that in your environment, congratulations. I'm just going to go to either covert channel where I'm going to use ping packets to send data outside your firewall. So it looks like the machine is pinging somebody from the outside, but your data is actually hidden inside those packets. It's a covert channel. Or I just use encrypted traffic going outbound port 443, because almost all these environments have that, because that's how users surf the internet securely, right? And so I'm going to find some way to get the data out. That's step 5. Notice I still have 2 more steps to do. I got what I came for, but I don't ever want to, if I need to get into that network again, I don't ever want to have to go through that same thing, all right? So what I am going to do is create some sort of a back door so I can get in later, all right? So I create either a listener or some sort of a beacon outside your network. A listener is the first thing I'm going to try. What a listener will do, and I am really terrible at drawing, say, something like an ear or something, but let's say that's an ear. All right, so this ear is listening for, here's the attacker. This is out on the big fluffy cloud of the internet here, all right? And so from the internet, I am going to send a packet through your firewall to this victim machine I've compromised. I set up a listening port. And so this listening port, once it hears me connecting in, it then establishes the rest of the connection. Now that is my ultimate goal, is to set up that listener. Problem is, am I going to be able to get a packet through your firewall? Remember I said we're much better at inbound filtering than we are outbound filtering. And so maybe I won't be able to do this. Now, what is my other option? I can set up a beacon from your machine going back outside to me. And so let's say this beacon just every few seconds, every few minutes sends one packet, one signal to the attacker machine. And so all the attacker machine, while I don't need this resource, I just ignore those connection packets coming outbound to me, right? And so eventually, oh, I want to get back in, I'm going to listen for one of those packets, and then I respond to that, and now I have a connection back inside your environment. This is much more likely to work just for the fact that our outbound filtering on firewalls are not as good and robust as our inbound filtering, right? So a listener is preferred because it's very stealthy. It's just listening. I'm not sending any packets on your network at all until I reconnect. But if I can't do that, the beacon will be just fine. My big concern about a beacon is if you start noticing that this victim machine is sending out a packet to my IP address every few minutes or every few seconds, you're going to start noticing that, right? If you're listening to your traffic. So that's why it's not as preferred. But the idea is that I am going to maintain access in your environment. The good news is for the good guys is that in order for me to do this, I need to install some sort of software in order to accomplish this goal. So I've now made changes to your environment that are going to persist. If you're doing good change control and change management and good baselining of your systems, you'll know when something is there that shouldn't be there, has no legitimate purpose, all right? So goal 7, I got some cleanup to do. I am going to clean up your logs. Your logs had all of this information, all of the clues about my attack are in your logs. And so I go into your log servers and I clean that up. These points of compromise, I made changes to your system to compromise them, so I'm going to back out of those changes. Put everything back where I found it originally. And the last thing is counterintuitive. The last step that I am going to do is I am going to patch your systems. Why am I patching your systems? Well, your systems had vulnerabilities in them, and so when you owned your systems and you didn't take care of them, Evil Doc now owns your systems, and so the word has been own, O-W-N. Some script kiddies in a chat channel once, somebody fat fingered the O to a P, because notice P is next to O on the keyboard, and somebody typed PWN, and that became known as pwn somebody's computer, right? And so now it's pwnage. I own it now. And since I own it, because you couldn't take care of it, I am going to patch it because I can love this system in a way you never could. So I'm going to take care of it right now. I own it now. All right. So I'll take care of that, because what if my evil buddies, they're trying to get in and then they kick me out, right? I'm going to do a better job than the original systems administrator. Why am I spending time talking about this particular one? Because a lot of organizations, they look at the patching of their systems the wrong way. I don't care if your systems are patched. I care what is your patching plan. All right, and how are we doing that? Because if a sysadmin either goes through an audit and the auditor says, "Hey, are your systems patched?" and they pull up the patch record and they say, "Yeah, look, see the system's patched." Meanwhile, the systems administrator is going, "I don't remember doing that, but I guess it's automatic or something." They weren't paying attention, and so it could have been evil doc in here. Instead, what the auditor's question should be is, how are you maintaining your patch levels in your systems? Because then if you see patches that were applied to the machine that we cannot explain through that process, that's evidence of possible compromise there, or somebody is at least doing actions that we haven't approved and authorized, right? So, whew, that was a lot of steps there. Those 7 steps. Why was I bothering to cover these? Is because this is what you do now. Now that you know what those steps are and you know how evil operates, what your job is to learn those tools. There's a lot of tools I didn't discuss. These are some of those tools. I'd say, if anything, learn those tools. Understand how they work so that you would understand in your network, when you're defending your network, what do the signs of activity of an attacker look like? Because if you know how they operate and you see those signs, you're much more likely to then identify that an evil attacker may have compromised your network. And when you detect you'll know by the activities that you see which step they're in. The reason that's important that you know what step that they're in is you now know what their next steps are going to be, right? So about those tools, I decided to do a big old mashup on the screen here of a bunch of the tools that I talked about. Here's all their nice logos and all of that. But most of these tools are in the Kali Linux operating system by default, or the Microsoft Windows operating system by default. There's, other than say Nessus, which is a paid product, all of these other tools are free and already available in these two operating systems of Microsoft Windows and Kali Linux. Now, with that being said, we're about 10 minutes of free time here to field questions. So if anybody has any questions, by the way, thank you for attending my talk. You are free to go if you don't have any questions or don't care to deal with that part. Maybe you're on lunch right now and you just want to get back to whatever it is that you need to do. So thank you so much for your time. Here's my contact information, and so you can reach me with any questions that you have there later. After you see the slides again and say, well, what did Doc mean by that? Feel free to contact me. But I'm going to turn it over to Carol here to see what kind of questions we got from this.
All right, thanks, Doc, for that great presentation. We do have a couple of questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone does have additional questions for Doc, please enter them into the questions window at any time. First of all, a little bit of feedback. Someone says, thank you for a wonderful session. And someone says, thanks, very good webinar. So, okay, so our first question, you mentioned that patch systems is evidence of a compromise. Why?
Possible evidence of compromise. Now, patch systems themselves isn't evidence of possible compromise. It's unauthorized patching could be evidence of compromise. And so the difference between the two, sadly, a lot of organizations won't know the difference between authorized and unauthorized. All they know is that their systems are patched right now. Those organizations do not have a good process and plan for keeping their systems up to date. Because if they did, they would know the difference between when an adversary had patched their systems and when the systems administrator had patched them. If I see that a system is fully patched, as an auditor, my normal functions are assessment and audit, folks. And so when I come in and I see a system is fully patched, I say, great, I want the evidence of how it got that way. And so, and then sit down with the systems administrator and say, so what is your process for patching systems? When do they get patched? How do we decide what patches to apply to them, and walk through that process and say, can you explain that all of these patches happened as a result of that process? And so in order to do that, you must have a good baseline of the system when it was originally implemented, and then take the patching plan, see all of the patches that were installed, and then you've got a resulting endpoint for your patch, for your fully patched system. Now, if we can't explain how all of those patches got there, that is a possible sign of compromise.
All right, thank you. All right.
No, thank you for the question. That was awesome.
Okay, the next one says, would you recommend VMs to practice or on your own machine?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that. It did actually, just in case I felt like doing so. With Kali Linux, I just did those screenshots just a little bit ago from this scan, and I did all of that from a Kali Linux VM. I heavily recommend virtual machines for this, because sometimes in the work that I'm doing on this machine, I want to blow away whatever it was that I had done on this machine and start from my original configuration. I can always do snapshots where I revert my snapshot back to my clean version of the OS after I got it all dirty doing this attack. And so I highly recommend virtual machines for both your Linux machines and your Windows machines as well. I had both of them open while I was doing this demo.
All right, thanks. What do you think is missing in terms of cyber tools?
What I think is missing as far as cyber tools goes, that's a great question, and I don't know that I'm prepared to fully answer that, because my mind initially went to, well, it'd be nice if there was a tool that automated all of these things for us. And the moment that I thought that, I needed to slap myself and say, Doc, that's really the wrong approach. There are security tools out there that say the vendor says, well, if you install this on your network, you will magically make you secure. And we all know that that's a load of crap, right? Excuse me for the word there, but it just simply is that. The tool, you need the right tool for the job, and you want those tools to be as automated as possible. Notice the attacker was using automated tools. The attacker had Shodan do all of that for him. Metasploit did that for him. Armitage did that for him. I don't feel that we're doing well in having good, usable, automatic defense tools without getting into this conundrum of, well, the defense tool does this, so wouldn't it be complementary and nice if it also did this? And then we end up with large companies. I won't name any specific company. These large companies try to solve all of your security problems using one tool, and then they have a whole bunch of tools that kind of do their job well, but don't do them great. And so rather than saying a specific tool, is what we need, I'd say identify what is the best tool for the job, and understand that not all of these tools are perfect fixes for these things. And so I guess I just answered the question without answering the question. So sorry about that. Now, I'll have to think more about that one. And thank you for the question. I always love questions that get me thinking.
All right, thanks, Doc. Any favorite super high payoff ways to find indications of the attacker behaviors that you have described?
Any high payoff? Yes. So tell you what, and this is something that I've taught many of my students before. Just start simply with, get a list of computers. There's somebody on your team that knows this information. There's 3 lists that I want you to get, all right? 3 lists of computers. First is the top 20 talkers on your network, and I'm talking about outbound connections. Top 20 outbound by number of connections. And that's list number 1. And I want to preface this as I'm actually stealing somebody else's work here. And so I'm going to give credit to Dr. Eric Cole in talking about this. Top 20 outbound connections by number of connections, and that's list number 1. 20 outbound for the length of the connections made, and that's list number 2. And then the third one is top 20 outbound by amount of data transferred. You got 3 lists here. Whatever machines in your environment are on all 3 lists, Dr. Eric Cole has basically said, and I've tested before, he's right, is that if there's a computer on all 3 lists, investigate it. It is likely compromised. And so if it's on all 3, doesn't mean that it is, but If they're on all three, there's something goofy going on here. Remember, earlier I had mentioned one of the things the attacker does is encrypt their connections, or they use some sort of a covert channel. This is going to bypass all of that. This doesn't care about encryption. This doesn't care about covert channels, because we're not focused on the data. We're focused on the connections themselves. All right. And so that is a win right there. You do that, and you will find systems that are compromised on your network currently. Thank you for the question. I appreciate that.
All right, thanks. I'm not sure if I feel like you might have addressed this when someone asked about a virtual machine, but I'll go ahead. Would you recommend doing this on your home network, on loved ones' machines? Loved ones is in quotes.
Yeah, and so there's actually, I think I know where you're going. Here's the thing, is that whether you may be crossing any legal lines, I don't know, when you're using your spouse's computers and your kids' computers that are on your network as the targets. I would be fully transparent with my family. You may not be breaking any laws, but you can hurt the trust of your family members if you were to do this without their permission. And I know that it's a big one. People getting started, they want to grab Kali Linux and they start using Metasploit against their loved ones' machines. And so I'd say legally there may be nothing wrong with that, but make sure that you do it with that they know that you're doing that. My family knows what I do for a living, and that I could do that against their machines. I don't without telling them about it, but I could. Yeah.
All right, let's see. What is the best practice for patching?
The best practice for patching?
Yes.
Is that what the question was? So for patching, okay. So the best practice for patching, it's interesting that you should bring that up. Let me go ahead and grab another, since we're on patched systems right here, I'll go ahead and the problem that we're dealing with patching today is, let's say inside of your organization, so the organization patching plan is that we are going to get the patches on, let's say we're working with Windows machines here, and we know that the patches come out on the second Tuesday of every month. And so on that Tuesday, the systems administrator is going to download and test these patches, and that normally takes them, say, a few days to do so. And I'm getting a warning that I'm going to, folks, I just turned off my webcam because I'm getting a message that my connection is slow, and so we'll go ahead and stop sharing that. Folks can still hear me, right?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay, thanks, Carol. And so, say on that Tuesday, they take a few days to download and test. And so let's say that takes 3 days to do so. And then they spend, say, the next 7 days rolling out the patches to these different machines. And so they start with workstations first, see if it breaks anything. Then on their less critical servers, they roll them out there. And then on the most critical machines, they finally start, say around the last few days, let's say my last 4 days of my patching plan is to roll it out to critical machines, high value targets like the CEO's computer and things like that. Oops, my pen just did something funky there. And so let's say through this, then this is typical for patching plans. We are at the end here. We are at 14 days to patch. So that's your typical plan. Now, on the other side of the house, let's talk about the adversary. The evil plan is that Tuesday, they download the patch. And so they do a reverse engineering Wednesday. So by the next day, they are trying to reverse engineer what the patch did. What does that mean? The patch changed something in Windows. And so what the adversary will do is they'll take a snapshot in their virtual machine of Windows. They will then patch it, and then they'll take another snapshot, and they'll compare the two snapshots. What changed in this operating system for that patch? What did the patch change? Because that is going to be a clue as to what was broken, right? Where's the vulnerability? It's whatever they made a change in. And so the adversary is going to reverse engineer Wednesday, which means that they are now at exploit. They write the exploit the next day, exploit Thursday. So the problem is with evil is taking 2 to 3 days to create an exploit, while it takes us 14 days to patch the system. This is a big concern. 14 is bigger than 2 to 3. The NSA has recently publicly announced that they're seeing exploits for patches out in the wild, which means that they're the vulnerability is being actively exploited within 48 hours of the patch being released. So when it comes to your patching plan, we need to shorten this time. What that looks like in your organization, the most valuable thing you can do is shorten that time frame. Ask yourselves, is it important for us to do this amount of thorough testing? When's the last time a patch broke something? And ask yourself, is it more important to roll these patches out sooner than to do all of this extensive testing? For a lot of people on this call, they are engineers that wouldn't necessarily know the answer to this. This is something you need to bring to the business and say, hey, you know, because of the way that systems are being exploited in the wild today very quickly, can we save time in testing and rollout so that we can get our systems patched sooner? Notice this is one of those, I was talking about the adage of running faster than the bear, and not running faster than the bear, running faster than everybody else, is if everybody else is still in this 14-day window, they're getting compromised when you ran faster than them. You got this done quicker. So I know that wasn't maybe a perfect answer to the question. What my intent here, though, is to tell you this is something you need to consider when you're asking what a patching plan looks like for your environment, for your organization. So thank you for that question. Appreciate that.
All right, Doc. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So I'm really grateful you gave everyone your contact information for additional questions that they may have.
Yes, please. If there's a question that I didn't answer for you, and oops, I got to the end of it here. Let me go ahead and put my contact information up one more time there. Feel free to email me, and I will do the best I can to answer your questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Doc, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thanks, everybody.